Hello ladies and gentlemen, Sergey Savenko here, aka EinhanderZwei's, recording this little video for his blog Earth Under Lucifer MK2. I'm recording it using my PS3 camera, the PlayStation Eye. What I want to do is, I have never done video reviews before, and watching so many episodes of The Angry Video Game Nerd, I was dying to do one, so here it is. For the first video of this kind, I decided to pay tribute to one of my, and not only my I assume, most favorite horror game franchises of all time. Of course, I'm talking about Resident Evil!
Resident Evil.
So what can I say about Resident Evil? It's definitely one of the top horror game franchises out there. It's constantly mentioned among the scariest games of all time lists, and I just love those games. I love those creepy storylines, creepy atmosphere, memorable characters, a huge arsenal in each game, and lots of ways to dispose of the hearts of incoming zombies. Yeah, basically among the zombie shooters, it's still among the top sellers. Even with the release of such great games as Left 4 Dead and its sequel, Resident Evil seems to be always popular and always demanded. Not to mention that I have beaten all the games in this series and a couple of spin-offs. Yeah, there are a set of so-called canon numbered games, I'm gonna call them this way, and lots of spin-offs. Also there are 4 movies, anime, soundtrack albums and stuff like this. So we're gonna take a look at my Resident Evil collection, the discs that I happen to own. But for those unfamiliar, let's take a quick look. You will watch this gameplay clip, and I will explain you the bare basics. So, in old school Resident Evil games, you are a polygonal character moving across the rendered backgrounds, killing off zombies and bosses, solving the puzzles, searching for the hidden objects, rearranging your inventory, and just trying to stay alive in the pretty harsh environment. So this is why the genre of these games is called survival horror, because the ammunition is scarce, so are the healing methods, the zombies are everywhere, so you gotta conserve each round and each healing item. As you can see, most of the games offer a selection between multiple characters, with few exceptions, but it's a norm in the series, a tradition that's carried over from the very first game. So I will show you my discs and tell a couple of sentences about each game, what I think about it and what does everyone think about it, because there are really some interesting facts that I want to share with you. Now, as we got the introduction out of the way, let me tell you how I was acquainted with the series. It all started with a TV show on our local television in my city, which is Nikolaev, Ukraine. One day they were showing the footage from Resident Evil 1. It was the second game that I saw in my life that had polygon graphics. The first was Taken 2. I got interested because I never really played genuine horror games before, so I wanted to check it out. There was a gaming club near my home which happened to have Resident Evil 2 in their possession. Of course I went there, I tried it. It was a new thing for me to have to draw your gun before firing. I got a little disappointed because I wasn't able to beat the first screen actually. Because I was a silly kid, I was thinking that I should kill all the zombies. Of course this is untrue. So I was disappointed. I thought that the game sucked. But then along came the Resident Evil 2 guide in the Navigator of the Gaming World magazine. I read it and it was pretty much mind-blowing for me because it felt like a sci-fi story, not your regular shoot-'em-up game. No offense to the shoot-'em-up games. I got really invested because they have translated all the plot dialogues and detailed all the steps to beat the game, beat all scenarios, unlock all bonuses. And I was thinking, my god, such a global game, and I was even unable to beat the first screen. I'm pathetic. But I had my chance to redeem myself a bit later, after I saw the Resident Evil movie. The one with Mila Jovovich and Michelle Rodriguez. I went to the theater, I liked it. It's a decent movie, but I'll give a more elaborate review later. So I really liked it, and one day I was walking from the computer school and visited the infamous Dandy video game shop, which is thankfully still alive today. And saw a little box set standing on the shelf. It was Resident Evil 2 for the PC. So, this is where we start. Resident Evil 1 was released in 1996 for the PlayStation. It sold around 1.5 million copies and became one of the top-selling games for the console in its early years. Not to mention that it was released only a year after the console itself. Pretty much it wasn't the first game in the survival horror genre, because previously there were such efforts as Haunted House on Atari 2600, which pretty much played like a modern survival horror game, but of course you should count the Atari limitations. But still, you were trapped in a haunted mansion, you had nothing except of matches at your side, you were displayed just like a pair of eyes, and died in one hit. The second breakthrough game for the genre was Alone in the Dark. It was released by Infogrames in 1992 for the PC, later ported to 3DO and Amiga, I guess. I may be wrong, but there definitely was a port for 3DO. It introduced the trademark security camera style that would be dominant in Resident Evil for the years to come, and was the introduction to the concept of 3D characters on the 2D backgrounds. Again, a feature that was thankfully ripped off by Shinji Mikami and the team. Shinji Mikami is the creator of the Resident Evil franchise. He worked at Capcom previously for the children games such as Aladdin and Goof Troop. Resident Evil started off as a first-person shooter, which they were trying to combine 2D and 3D graphics in whatever way. Unfortunately, no footage from that game has survived, so neither me nor even game trailers can tell you about it. But it was shifted to the perspective that we all recognize today. Also, there was another inspiration for the first Resident Evil game. It was Sweet Home, an RPG for the NES. Or more accurately for the Famicom, because it was never released in Europe or USA. It was released to promote the horror movie of the same name, and it even featured the same style of loading doors that again became a trademark in Resident Evil. Yeah, the first person scene of opening the doors, it was introduced in Sweet Home. But when it all came down, Shinji Mikami just threw it all in the blender, and now we have a masterpiece that was the originator of our favorite franchise. So now, as I told you how I got acquainted with the game and how it was created, let's take a look at the first disc in my collection. The one I was talking about, Resident Evil 2 for the PC, that I got being under the influence of the Resident Evil movie. So here we have it, the Resident Evil 2 box set for the PC. It was released by the infamous publisher Akella, which unfortunately has a very bad reputation nowadays. with the Star Force induced releases and stupid translations, but this is actually a pretty nice deal, because aside from all of this, it does contain one of the greatest bonuses I have ever encountered. So in addition to the two Resident Evil 2 discs, we have Resident Evil 1. Yeah, that was Jill and she looked kinda pissed. Resident Evil 1 is in English here and Resident Evil 2 is translated. The translation itself is pretty decent, but unfortunately only the text is translated, not the speech, but maybe that's for the best, because knowing the Russian voice actors, no offense, but most of them actually do suck. The title is translated to Russian as Обитель зла. It's a pretty fair translation of the Resident Evil word combination, so no complaints here. Now on to the first game. The story revolves around the Special Forces unit named STARS, which consists of two teams, Alpha and Bravo. At the beginning of the game we get a narration of current situation in the forest near the Raccoon City, where bizarre murders have occurred. The victims were reported to be partly eaten, and the killers were never found. So Bravo team is sent to investigate. Unfortunately they vanish without any traces, so Alpha team is sent to make contact with them and pretty much solve the mystery of these strange reports. After the infamous live-action cutscene, the three main characters find themselves in the hall of the haunted house. The characters are Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, both of them are playable and you gotta select one of them when you start the game, and Albert Wesker. They decide to separate the ways and search for the remains of Bravo team if there were any, and try to locate other survivors. But the first animated character that they do encounter is the game's first zombie. Or it may be the mutant dog if you decided just to leave the hole through the front door. So after disposing of the zombie, everyone except of the main character, the one you selected, disappears, and so does the game really start off. You're running around, solving puzzles, killing zombies, or just evading them, saving your progress with the typewriters, and good stuff like this. It does have separate features for the main characters, and it depends on the one you choose at the beginning. For example, Chris's inventory is smaller than Jill, but he has more health and he gets assistance in puzzle solving. And Jill has a large inventory, she has also a lockpick, she also gets additional ammunition and weapons along the game. The game is not strictly linear. Of course you have no choice but to visit 4 separate locations, which are the mansion and the locations around it, including the underground sewers and of course trademark place for the whole series, the abandoned laboratory. Of course the game is a masterpiece not only because of the features I mentioned above, but it also has great story with several interesting twists, great atmosphere, hordes of zombies, and lots of ways to dispose of both the zombies and the main characters. The puzzles are really creative, even more creative than in some of the later games, I must say. And the graphics are excellent for the time, again counting that it was nearly a launch title for the console. So there's no denial that Resident Evil 1 is simply one of the greatest games ever made. I am no one to judge it. It had crazy sales, a cult following, and several ports. Subsequently it was released on Sega Saturn, unfortunately I didn't have a chance to play this version, and on PC, including the Resident Evil 2 box set that I've shown you before. And actually it is a legal copy, yes, it's a hologram. Also it was ported to Nintendo DS, which again I didn't play this version, remade for Nintendo GameCube, and this remake was ported to Nintendo Wii. Again, never touched these ones, but judging from the screenshots and gameplay videos and the list of new features, I definitely should do, because it's not just a remake, a complete reimagining of the original game. And after all, it was ported to PlayStation Network. Of course, I had to legally download it for my PS3 and PSP. All the versions have their own notable elements. For example, the Southern version has the prototype of the Extreme Battle mode from Resident Evil 2 that was eventually renamed to Mercenaries mode in RE3 and known as the Mercenaries since then. Also, it had slightly better graphics thanks to Southern's capabilities. The PC version begins with the unedited, uncensored intro that was originally cut down in some of the versions for the PlayStation. The uncensored intro has some photographs of zombie corpses instead of newspaper clips in the cleaned up version. Chris is lighting up and smoking a cigarette. Joseph Frost's death is much more gruesome and disturbing, and it's in color, so you can surely see Wesker's bad hairdo. Also, there were several releases of the PlayStation version itself. For example, the first and the Director's Cut editions had electronic soundtrack, but the DualShock edition changed it to a symphonic one. Also, starting from the Director's Cut, there's an alternative mode called the Arranged version that is just all the rooms in the house rendered from different angles, so you got to rethink your strategy. A similar feature was in the Nintendo DS release under the Rebirth mode title. After the huge success of RE1, the sequel was undeniable. So Shinji Mikami and the team has started to work on it. What has came along would be eventually known as Resident Evil 1.5. It's a beta version that was scrapped for the game to be redone from scratch. It featured two new playable characters, Leon Kennedy and Elsa Walker. But I guess they thought that the concept was too similar to the first game, so they were forced to rehash it. The first character has been carried over to the final game, but Elsa was replaced by character Claire Redfield, sister of Chris from the first game. Resident Evil 2 had high expectations after the success of the first one, and boy did it deliver. It's often considered to be the best in the entire franchise, and I guess that's pretty much rightful. Even I have this game in multiple copies. So it's the PC version that I already shown to you. Also, I have it on my PS3, of course, and there's this nice disc for the PS1. And I'm actually not sure if it's legal or not. Maybe you will help me to identify it, because it has this player's label. The descriptions on the back are in English, and we get these traditional PlayStation icons. So maybe you will help me to identify it, because it would be awesome if it's actually a legit physical copy of RE2. The story so far revolves around Leon and Claire arriving to Raccoon City, each with their own goals. It's Leon's first workday at the Raccoon City Police Department, and Claire is searching for her brother, who disappeared after the events of RE1. They are brought together, but forced to be separated after a little accident. So again, you choose whom to play as. This time not using the menu, but by inserting the disc. The first one is Leon and the second is Claire. It was actually the first Resident Evil game that I have beaten, and I did it in a very funny way. That's of course worth talking about. So, when I got it for the PC, I have beaten around half of Leon's A campaign. And after that my friend came along, wanted me to show him the game. I did, and somehow my saves got all erased afterwards. Not sure what was that. So I had to reach this point again. I did just that. Then my other friend came along and asked the same thing. I did. I showed him the game. He played a little bit. And later in the evening I decided to check whether my saves corrupted again or not. They weren't, and I ended up beating all 4 campaigns and unlocking all bonuses just in one night. It was an incredible experience, and of course that never happens to bad games when you are ignoring everything and just sitting till the morning, but you got to get this beaten. There were actually other games that I played in such a way by spending whole nights on them, like Fallout 2, GTA 1, most recently Resident Evil Code Veronica, Super Metroid, and it was an unforgettable experience. It was not the first of its kind, but the most memorable. And why can it be? The game is undeniably polished. It's incredible. You got larger campaign, longer storyline with several additional characters, amazing cutscenes, huge arsenal again, even not counting the bonus weapons. But as for the bonuses themselves, there are too many. The extreme battle mode, DualShock support, the 4th survivor scenario, the tofu survivor scenario, and many more stuff is just jam-packed with things to enhance its replayability, and by God they work. Okay, so on to the story. I've already told you how it all begins. Leon and Claire arrive to the city, and at the same time the Special Forces unit led by Umbrella, the corporation responsible for so-called T-virus, which has offered enough suffering for the characters in the first game. They are dropped in the city to clean it up. Clean it up from zombies, of course. According to the first cutscene, they failed miserably and lead to the creation of the game's main boss. You start off in the street with that infamous first screen where I was trying to kill all zombies. Then you end up in Raccoon City police station, which is basically this game's haunted mansion. What you are up to is to find a way to escape the city and try to deal with as many problems as possible, especially when you meet additional characters. There's an additional character for Leon, Ada Wong. She is pretty much the sex symbol of the series, and Claire is joined with Sherry Birkin, a mysterious girl which has some connections with the current situation in the city. There are 2 campaigns per each character, which are Leon A, Leon B, Claire A, Claire B. Beating the A scenario for one character unlocks the B scenario for the second, which leads to 2 mostly equal but different at the same time plot lines. Capcom has later suggested that Leon B, Claire A is considered to be canon, which is a bit on the trolling side, because when you start off the game you usually insert disc 1, which in this case is Leon's disc, and unavoidably you play his A campaign, which is not considered to take place at all. Whatever. Resident Evil 2 was later ported to different consoles as well, including the PC. It was also on Dreamcast, GameCube, PlayStation Network again, and pretty much I guess that's all. There are not so many differences between the versions compared to the first game. Maybe the DualShock support, the extreme battle mode is not available in all the versions, and maybe a little bit crispier graphics. This is a bit unfortunate, because the game that is considered to be the best in the series never got a proper remake. And the ports don't really differ from each other. But there was one exception, the Nintendo 64 port. It is notable simply because of the fact that it is a Nintendo 64 port of a 2-disc game, which is unthinkable. Of course, the backgrounds and the cutscenes were compressed to a pixelated mess, but the models were cleaned up. They have anti-aliasing, even the PC version doesn't have this. It had the sound system programmed by none other than Chris Hülsbeck, who you might know from the Turrican soundtracks. It also had an interesting feature to change the color of blood for the zombies and for the main character. You can choose red, green, blue. Also it has a set of additional documents to collect, which are basically Jill's diary, explaining the events taking place between RE1 and 2, and a small cameo by Hunter, one of the most prominent enemies in the first game. So pretty much the Nintendo 64 port is the most stuffed with additional features. Here we have it, Resident Evil 2, amazing game, but not treated as well as the others. Now on to Resident Evil 3. It seems that everyone has some kind of problems with it. Some say that Nemesis is too annoying, which is actually pretty silly because the whole thing feels like a John Woo movie, where the enemies are introduced from the start and you just watch the whole thing of them trying to get to each other. It's awesome. I say that the puzzles are too hard, which is again pretty silly. Because guys, you never played Code Veronica. The puzzles in RE3 are among the easiest in the franchise. But there are also some complaints that I kinda agree with. For example, some say that the gameplay is too action-oriented, which is partially true because if you start on easy difficulty you get all the weapons in the nearest case, you have an assault rifle with you from the start, and you have unlimited increment, but yeah, even the older games and the newer ones were much harder even on easy difficulty. Also, some say that the story is trivial. Again, I kinda agree with it, but not entirely. Maybe it's not as horrifying as RE1 or not as epic as RE2, but of course it also has some interesting twists, memorable moments, in Nemesis himself, who is just the highlight of the entire thing. And it also has an array of bonus ending explaining the events after the PlayStation trilogy has concluded. If only it was a trilogy, but we'll get to this in a few minutes. Resident Evil 3 had a very complicated development cycle. From the beginning, Mikami wanted to be a next-generation demon-slashing game, combining the slasher and shooter elements, but of course he too realized it was a not so bright idea and it was carried over to a brand new franchise. Of course I'm talking about Devil May Cry. The second version ended up on Dreamcast, continuing the story arc of Chris Redfield and his sister. Of course I'm talking about Code Veronica here. So it was just decided to conclude the events of the first two games and carry over the plotline for Jill, who again disappeared after the events of the first game. It turns out she was in the Raccoon City all along, as the events take place one day before and eventually one day after RE2. I have beaten it on a PC, also I have it downloaded for PS3 and this nice little bootleg for Dreamcast. Here it is. The story begins with Jill just trying to escape from the city, seeking any kind of help and searching for survivors. She doesn't get neither, so it's only her wits that helps her to overcome the infestation that was so unsuccessfully cleaned up in RE2. Eventually she meets up with a mercenaries unit hired by Umbrella to assist in the city quarantine. And of course with Nemesis. This is one of the most recognized images of Resident Evil as a whole. It was included not as far as in the second Resident Evil movie. You fight him throughout the whole game, as I've hinted at while comparing this thing to a John Woo movie. And on the hard difficulty, he is supplying you collectibles and upgrades for your weapons. The weapon system is a bit more sophisticated this time. You're able to create new ammunition using the so-called reloading tool and different kinds of gunpowder by mixing it and enhancing the ammo count as long as you go. But the gameplay doesn't really differ from the earlier games. You have only one playable character, who is Jill, but at some point the focus is shifted from her to a new character named Carlos Oliveira, one of the Umbrella's mercenaries. As I just said, the gameplay doesn't really differ, so I don't see any need to focus on it. There are also no real bonuses. The mercenaries mode is not as hidden. Only the bonus endings are available, each new for each time you beat the game. So let's head on to the ports. Resident Evil 3 was released on a PC, PlayStation Network, Dreamcast and GameCube. The Dreamcast version is notable for having the ability to change Jill's costume at the beginning, including Regina's outfit from Dino Crisis. So in conclusion, as a game itself, RE3 is good. It surely does not disappoint both the hardcore and the novices. But as a closure to the PS3 trilogy, it's of course slightly better than average. It could be more epic, it could have even longer playthrough, but we get what we got, and we get a very decent game. Not on par with 1 and 2, but very close to that. Of course, the true closure for the PS1 trilogy would be the infamous Resident Evil Gun Survivor. Unfortunately, I don't have it on either physical or digital copies, and I'm pretty much not that disappointed, because Gun Survivor is considered to be the worst in the series, and I can see why, but I do not agree entirely. Despite having some major flaws, Gun Survivor is actually scary. It again has great music, multiple paths, but unfortunately there are major problems with it, like no ability to save during the gameplay, no ability to strafe, inferior graphics, but after all it was one of the first console exclusive first-person shooters, which wasn't as prominent thing back then as it is now, especially on PS1, but at least PS1 had Doom and Disruptor and Power Slave, which handled much better. So yeah, I can agree why Gun Survivor is always seen as least best in the franchise. The story revolves around an amnesiac finding himself on Sheena Island without any traces of his past memories and only a gun with unlimited ammunition on his side. During the game you encounter all kinds of enemies, mostly taken from RE2, some bosses, visit several locations, and the locations you will visit further depend on the choices you made earlier. The gameplay is actually unlike anything you think about when you hear the term first-person shooter. You are moving freely but without ability to fire, and if you want to put a bullet in someone's head you have to stop and put a crosshair on the screen, so it kinda decently reminds the gameplay of RE4 and 5. But the whole experience is flawed. As we noted earlier, you cannot strafe, you cannot save. The difficulty is pretty high, and even the continues don't help too much. It was never ported to the arcades and other consoles, even on the PlayStation Network it's unavailable currently. The light gun support was removed from the North American release, which is one of the reasons why it failed so miserably, because it's really a stupid decision. Just why? Since Japan and Europe has got the normal version. The only port I think of it's the PC port made in Asia, but never had a chance to play this one, so no comments here. Gun Survivor is the least best in the series, but it has still some hooks. it has this Resident Evil feel. So just drop off all the expectations of it to blow your mind like it was with previous games, and you might actually enjoy it. This concludes the first part of my video about the first Resident Evil sub-series for the first PlayStation. But as a bonus track, let's take a look at a couple more discs and a couple more games. Let me show you this. This is the bootleg collection of Resident Evil 1 to 5 that I has given as a present to my fiancée, Michelle. Can't say anything about it because I was not the one who tried it. She did, of course, but she has reported that all games are not working, but it's something you have to deal with when you're talking about the piracy, especially modern piracy, because the old bootleg games, at least the ones that I have, they were actually working. And as for the PS1 series, they have inspired other games, most notably Silent Hill, which came in 2001 and since has become the main rival for the Resident Evil series, but as of now, unlike Resident Evil, it has known way better days. Also, there is a Resident Evil clone created by Capcom themselves, which is Dino Crisis. I have this bootleg for Dreamcast, and also I have it digitally downloaded on the PlayStation Network. Basically, as you can get it from the title, it replaces the zombies with dinosaurs. There's only one playable character, or at least I've never played this game deep enough to uncover others. But again, it's pretty decent because just because the Resident Evil formula rarely does lead to really bad games, not counting maybe Alone in the Dark 3 or New Nightmare, whatever. Also, it has inspired Square's now trilogy called Parasite Eve. Unfortunately, I don't have any physical copies of it, but I have the first game on my PS3. It's again a pretty great game. The gameplay doesn't really remind you of Resident Evil, but even this was fixed in Parasite Eve 2. And the first game is more like an action RPG with a horror theme. It's based on a Japanese novel of the same title, but actually it's more like a sequel, because the events of the novel are referenced briefly in the game itself. The combat system is totally unlike RE, but it too combines polygon characters above the rendered backgrounds. If you have a chance, check this out. Parasite Eve, at least the first one, is an amazing game.
Okay, so the last game I'm gonna talk about today is Chaos Break. It's a sequel to an arcade game called Chaos Heat made by Taito for the PlayStation. Just from the opening clip you get a strong resemblance with Resident Evil. And furthermore, there is this eye in the background which looks exactly like most of the Resident Evil title screens, the voice that says the title of the game, and the character designs, especially the girl. Because when you're looking at her, it's blue armor and blue beret, how can you not think of Jill here? But the gameplay is very different from Resident Evil, as this is more like an action game, sort of like One or Apocalypse or Expendable. All of them were for the PlayStation 2. But overall, it's a decent game for the PS1 library.
This is it. Sorry for the blatant jump cuts, sorry for my accent. I hope you were not bored to death. And I will see you next time when we will cover Couch Veronica 4 and 5. And there will also be a part 3 when we will talk about Resident Evil movies. So stay tuned. That was Sergey Savenko, aka EinhanderZwei's. Visit my blog. Lots of good stuff here. Talk to you later.